Hello everyone, and today I would like to continue my SOX journey, and I would like to share with you one of my experience when I was creating the SOX from scratch. Of course, today we're not going to discuss how to design the controls or how to determine the ITGC and other things. Those videos you can access in my channel, so just scroll down, and in my previous videos I was describing how to design the controls, how to design the IPEs, how to design the ITGCs. So today it's going to be the overall. Within my career, I roll out a lot of SOX and Japanese, so US SOX and Japanese SOX, called JSOX programs. And all in all, if I need to create a greenfield from the scratch, I'm always using this approach, like a 6-phase SOX build. So I always start with the scoping. And just a small remark, you always need to treat the SOX project as a project. So it should have the sponsors, it should have a sponsor, it should have the stakeholder map. So nothing different from any other implementation project. And I am also considering that you can create within the 6 months. I could create it with, like, prior the AI era within 8 months. So with AI, with the great help of AI, you can create it even faster. So the scope, what does it mean, scope? It means the systems in scope, and especially those systems that are engaged and that are involved into the your financial statement. Of course, it's a ERP and other systems. I also discussed in my previous video that how important is ITGC, especially for the reporting systems like Power BI. So I would not discuss it today, but we need to determine the scope, the systems. As per the SOX, you definitely need to consider all the transactions that are engaging the financial statement. Of course, it's a financial statement closure. It is the inventory controls. It is P2P, O2C, R2R processes, and of course, ITGC and IT application controls. Then, of course, you also need to know about your risk framework. If you don't have any risk and you're creating completely from the scratch, you need to determine the risks. And again, I will not describe today how to design the risk, how to connect, how to map it out, because I describe it in my previous video, how to design the controls. Then, of course, as I mentioned, you need to treat it as a project. You need to have a stakeholder map. You need to have the sponsor. You need to have a steering committee. You need to have the stakeholders that are involved in every area. Like, let's say, if it is inventory management, you need to determine and understand who are your stakeholder, who is going to be your, not only the control performer and the reviewer, but who is the business owner, who is going to sign off your risk and control metrics. And then, of course, who is going to provide you the walkthrough, that you also need to map out their engagement. I'm always creating this timestamp that, okay, depending on the transactions, depending on the risk landscape, depending on the financial statement assertions, you need to determine how much time every stakeholder needs to be engaged in. Then, of course, the control design, the mapping to the risks. Then you for sure need to do the dry run or testing, and then you will be the audit ready. So this video, I forgot to mention that it is based on my very recent experience. The scope, as I already mentioned, you need to determine where is the financial statement linkage. So, of course, it's going to be your ERP system, reporting system, and, for instance, if it is the financial statement controls that are touching your salaries and wages, then, of course, it's a salary and wages. If it is the inventory system, then it should be the inventory system. There is also should be the third-party dependencies. So, for instance, if you have other systems that are not in-house or in the cloud, like Azure, Microsoft. Of course, sometimes it's not that much relevant to the financial statement, but you also need to ensure that you have SOC 1, SOC 2 report. By the way, if you are curious about these reports and how to do the third-party risk assessment, just let me know in the comment and I would love to share with you. The risk identification is very much important because that will determine your scope for the controls. There is a thumb rule as per the PCAOB that every key risk needs to be at least covered by the one key control. Of course, to be on a safe side, you need to determine the compensatory controls, the secondary controls. Why? Because if the control fails, and in a SOX perimeter, you know that it's a binary, you either fail or pass. And then, of course, you need to ensure that every risk is covered fully. Just as a remark, again, I'm not going to describe how you need to design the control, how you need to map it to the risk. I describe it in the design, and if it's not enough, again, I am welcoming you in the comments. But it is pretty much important that you are looking into the assertion, you are looking into the risk, and defining the control accordingly. So let's assume that your risk is an inventory valuation. We need to make sure that the controls that you're designing, they are covering the risk of valuation, not only physical occurrence, not only presence, but also the valuation. That means that the transactions, the writing off, the reserves also need to be there. There is one small remark that you need in the first years, you should consider be a little bit less aggressive. Do not overcomplicate, but still do not do the minimum. This is my personal experience, because if you are creating too few controls, to add new controls would be very difficult. You will face with the resistance from your organization. So that's why you need to find the right balance. And again, as I said, there is a thumb rule, at least one key control per one key risk. The stakeholder mapping is crucial here, and this should be, of course, starting in the beginning. You need to have the executive sponsor, you need to have a buy-in, you need to be someone on the CXO level, or somebody who can speak up and who can sponsor your project, who can be present on the steering committee and push back if something is going wrong. Because the SOX, it is important, it is the corporate governance. You need to have a proper buy-in, you need to have an escalation path. The process owners are super crucial because, as I said, they are going to sign off your controls, your narratives, your flow charts. Their employees are going to execute the controls, and the success factor is always with the process owner. Of course, the control performers, the control reviewers, those people, they are on the ground, they are going to execute, they know better. With them, you're primarily going to have all the walkthrough, because the process owners, they not always know what is going on the floor. And of course, they're always engaging with IT, because nowadays everything is touching IT system and ITGC controls, and in general, the IT setup, some modifications needs to be discussed up front. So even if you are feeling that, oh, I don't need to engage with IT, you should include them in a steering committee, at least the executive from IT. Yes, so as I already mentioned, that every control needs to be mapped to the risk. It should be operable, business should run it, because the control is not only designed, it should live, it should breathe. Yes, and you always need to define the evidence. Again, I would not describe it today, because I would really encourage you to watch my previous video. I always engaging with the workshop process. So even the prior, we're kicking off this project. you always need to describe why we're doing it. What is the why the SOX is important? What is the responsibility of the company or the CFO, CEO, and below? How it is important to make sure that it is operating as it intended and is designed. And if this design is wrong, it will be the design deficiency, which is not also the good thing. So you need to clearly define why we're doing it, not only to mitigate the risk, but why it is important for the organization, for the publicly traded company. Then, of course, as you go, as you are implementing the controls, you need to have the workshops with them individually, all together, decide by yourself. I am more into the individual workshops because it's easier to describe, and then if necessary, you can invite the broader audience. Then, of course, I would never stop talking about the RACI. You always need to describe who is responsible, who is accountable. If the control fails, who needs to make sure that it is operating? If the process changes, who is going to maintain that? Because where the SOX is not good enough, because in the beginning you did not describe who is going to maintain that, who is going to make sure that the processes are up to date. If you have a good second line of defense, and I never seen like a proper second line of defense who is doing from A to Z. So you need to ensure that there is a responsibility in place and sign it off. So you need to take the sign off from the people who understands, who is going to execute the controls. Because there is a tricky point that while the auditors are going to test it, they will look into whether the performers and the control performers, the control reviewers, they understand what they are doing, and they understand the controls, they understand the risk, and they understand what basically they're doing there. And again, the accountability, name the person always. That's also part of the maintenance, where you need to update. If you have a good GRC system where you can maintain the risk and control metrics, that's very good, because in the SOX area, the controls maintenance, the controls update, the control by itself, because the auditors are testing the control design from the date it was updated. So you need to also have a very good audit trail about this. So the testing is also very much important prior you are implementing it. And this is kind of just a casual testing. You don't need to rate it, but it is for your own sake that it is as per the design, it's mitigating the risk, it is bringing the good evidence, all the IPEs are in place. The operating effectiveness is also very much important. Of course, while you're implementing, you cannot test the operating effectiveness. So therefore, I'm always implementing with the waves. So you can take, for instance, the inventory control stream, then you can implement it, then you start already operating it. So then you can test at least 1 or 2 months while you're also engaging and implementing, rolling out other streams. And again, the SOX is a binary, fail or pass. So that's why we need to ensure that there is no material weakness. And if there is, then we need to maybe add more controls or compensatory controls or escalate it immediately. Yes, and 6 months, that's what basically I had been implementing. So the month 1, it's a scope and risk framework. Then the month 2, actually, it should be also in the month 1 stakeholder map and the workshops. Then you need to have the control design complete. In reality, it is not a waterfall. You're doing it at the same time, design effectiveness and operating effectiveness, and then we can hand it over to the auditors. Of course, this is the ideal situation, and it very much depends how many employees you would engage. But therefore, the stakeholder mapping is crucial, and how much time the business can allocate for this, that's also very much important. That's why you need to be very, very clear upfront, ensure that your stakeholders understand their engagement, how much time they're going to spend, especially if you don't have a big team who is going to implement. Therefore, they are going to be your hands, your extended hands. So therefore, I am calling it as a project. That's why you need to have the tone at the top, the proper engagement from your sponsor. Yes, so I think I reached this point. It is a very, very short video about the SOX. And also in my website, you can see I created the identity and access management interview questionnaire and change management questionnaire, where you can also assess what is going on with your identity management and change management. And in previous video I mentioned how crucial it is for the business process controls. With that, I'm welcoming all your notes, comments, and I would truly appreciate if you would ask me questions, which I could reply. See you next time. Bye.